Before we begin, if you enjoy real stories, strange mysteries, and journeys that stay with you long after the video ends, subscribe to the channel. It takes 1 second, costs nothing, and it genuinely helps us keep making these stories. Thank you. Now, let's get into it. We want to take a moment for the people of Nepal's Rasuwa District, where a catastrophic flash flood tore through the Bhote Koshi Valley, devastating communities downstream toward Trishuli and Nuwakot. Homes, businesses, roads, and bridges have been swept away. Families have been separated, and rescue teams are still searching for those who remain unaccounted for. To everyone who has lost someone, to those still waiting for news, and to the rescuers risking their lives to help others, our hearts are with you. For anyone wishing to help, we'll leave links below to verified relief efforts and organizations supporting the communities affected by this disaster as things unfold. March 30th, 2023, Kathmandu. A woman enters the hotel suite of one of the most famous mountaineers on earth. She says she isn't there for a date. She isn't there for other favors. According to her account, she is there to talk business. The man waiting inside is Nirmal Purja, Nims Dai, former British Special Forces. The man from the famous 14 Peaks Netflix film. The man who climbed all 14 8,000-meter mountains in just 189 days. The man who had become, for millions of people, almost a symbol of what Nepali mountaineers were capable of. And according to the woman, before she entered that room, she had already tried to make one thing clear. This was not supposed to turn inappropriate. Then, the door closed. What happened afterward depends entirely upon whose account you believe. She alleged that Nims kissed her unexpectedly, that the encounter moved toward the bedroom, that clothing began coming off, and that she repeatedly refused him. She alleged inappropriate, provocative touching occurred despite those refusals. Eventually, she says the encounter stopped short of intercourse. Nims denied wrongdoing. Categorically, his lawyer described the allegations as false and defamatory. So, what actually happened inside that room? There was no camera, no independent witness standing beside them, no police investigation that eventually produced a verdict, no courtroom, no conviction, no acquittal. But there was evidence around the edges. A message sent that same day, time-stamped photographs, a driver whose account challenged the timing, earlier flirtatious conversations, a WhatsApp message that allegedly established a boundary but later disappeared. And then there was something else, because this wasn't the first allegation. Before Kathmandu, there had been another woman, another alleged encounter, another country, but this time there was no hotel. There were tents, a glacier, thousands of meters of rock and ice, and above everything else, K2. The only man who can defend those allegations is now gone forever, taken by the Broad Peak avalanche.
Wait, was she climbing with his company?
Yes, she was a paying expedition client.
Then for me, this just became a completely different story.
There is something we need to make absolutely clear. We're discussing allegations, not established criminal findings. Nims Purja denied wrongdoing while he was alive. Neither of the two allegations we're examining resulted in a criminal trial determining whether the alleged acts occurred. The original investigation reported that neither woman had notified law enforcement or other authorities. We're also deliberately not naming either woman. Not because their identities are secret. They aren't, but because the story isn't about sending an audience toward individual people. We're interested in something much bigger. The evidence, the disputed evidence, the leadership, power, mountaineering culture, professional boundaries, and an uncomfortable question. Could two people walk away from the same interaction understanding it completely differently? Or, when you're the person holding the authority, is it your responsibility to make sure that uncertainty never develops in the first place? And we're probably going to disagree about that. Before anybody assumes I'm sitting here simply defending Nims because I admire what he accomplished, I'm not approaching this as somebody who's been outside of competitive sport. I myself have been inside a competitive community, playing competitive sports. I played university basketball, working towards pro contract, soccer at the highest competitive level before the semi-professional teams. I hike and climb mountains. And I also have taught high school for many years, so I've been in a professional environment. I'm extremely competitive when it comes to setting the mountain goals and achieving them. I'm kind of a peak bagger, but I also coach track athletes at a high level. I've spent years around athletes, coaches, teams, and competitive environments, and I've seen what happens when the different genders of people train together, travel together, compete together, win together, lose together, and when relationships become informal. People joke, people tease each other, people become close, and sometimes outsiders can look at that familiarity without understanding the context around it. That's why my concern throughout this story is something very specific. Don't turn hindsight into evidence. Because once somebody is accused of something serious, everything that happened before the allegation changes color. A joke looks different, a text looks different, confidence looks different, flirting looks different, a photograph looks different. And once the accused person dies, it's even easier to interpret everything for them because they can no longer explain themselves. So my position is show me what was the alleged, show me what supports it, show me what contradicts it, but don't ask me to fill the missing pieces with assumptions.
And that's probably where our professional experiences take us in different directions. I've also spent years competing and coaching high level athletes, the sports where you are often left coaching the athlete one on one internationally. I've coached female athletes. I've traveled with teams, hotels, competitions, training camps, late arrivals, early departures, injuries, emotional conversations, all the situations where boundaries can become complicated if you're careless. And I've become more conservative about boundaries as I've gained experience, not less. And my principle is don't create a situation you will have to explain afterward. If something can happen in a public space, I use the public space. If communication can stay professional, it stays professional. On team level, there are structures, curfews, meeting times, common areas, staff, other athletes, and my own personal standard around unnecessary physical contact is extremely strict, and you know it. Not because every touch is misconduct. Obviously not. We are coaches. Sometimes somebody is injured. Sometimes you are demonstrating something. Sometimes safety requires physical assistance. But I don't want unnecessary ambiguity around my relationship with an athlete. That protects her and it protects me.
Yes, the biggest rule, the rule of two, where another responsible adult should be present at all times with your athlete besides yourself. But these rules aren't necessarily the rules Nims was operating under. He's an expedition leader, not an athletics coach.
Correct. And I'm not going to retroactively declare somebody guilty because he didn't follow my coaching practice. But here's my question. If commercial expedition leaders are taking tens of thousands of dollars from the client, traveling internationally with them, living with or more appropriately around them for weeks and even months, and sometimes making decisions affecting whether they live or die, why wouldn't we expect at least as much clarity around professional boundaries?
That's different from proving that somebody crossed them.
Completely different, and that's going to matter later.
Now, let's rewind, because if we begin with what the woman alleged happened inside that Kathmandu suite, we miss something important. She and Nims already knew each other through mountaineering. They had communicated, and according to the New York Times investigation, some of those conversations had been flirtatious. The reporting said Nims could be flirtatious in messages with both women involved in the article. It also reported that the women sometimes bantered back, while at other times, changing the subject or not responding. That matters to me. Not because previous flirting equals consent, it absolutely doesn't, but because we're trying to understand how two people arrived at a particular moment. Humans' interactions, they have history.
I agree. Until somebody establishes a boundary.
And according to that woman's account, that's exactly what she tried to do. She said she and Nims arranged to meet in Kathmandu to discuss potentially working together on an expedition. Nims apparently suggested coffee in his hotel suite because meeting in the lobby could attract attention. And given the tone of some of the previous messages, she said she deliberately clarified beforehand that this wasn't a meeting for intimate physical reasons. The Times reported that she described telling him this wasn't a booty call and said he agreed, and that specific exchange wasn't available when journalists investigated. Their WhatsApp chat had been configured so messages disappeared after 7 days. And suddenly, we have our first missing piece.
Which means we have her account that the boundary was communicated, but not for the original message itself.
Exactly. And that distinction matters. She went to meet him at the Marriott in Kathmandu, according to her version. He preferred the privacy upstairs because of the attention is celebrity generated downstairs. And I actually understand that. Nims wasn't anonymous. By this point, his face had been seen around the world. There are perfectly innocent reasons why a famous person might prefer privacy for a conversation.
And this is where I immediately get uncomfortable.
But she voluntarily went upstairs.
That's irrelevant to whether anything of intimate nature was consented to.
I know that. I'm saying the room itself doesn't prove anything.
I agree with you. Being in somebody's hotel suite proves nothing about intimate consent. I am asking a different question. If this is professional, why choose private accommodation at all when reasonable alternatives exist? That's all.
Because he's famous.
Then arrange a private conference room, a quiet section of a restaurant, bring another colleague. There are solutions. Again, I'm not saying he met her privately, therefore he committed misconduct. That would be ridiculous. I am saying professional systems should remove avoidable ambiguity. That's all.
But you're applying coaching standards.
I'm applying a principle of leadership.
Your standards aren't necessarily his standards.
And maybe that's exactly the question this story raises.
According to the woman's account, once they were inside the suite, Nims kissed her without warning. She alleged that the encounter progressed toward the bedroom. She said she became confused and frightened. She alleged that he removed clothing despite repeated refusals. She described trying different ways to get him to stop without provoking or agitating him. She alleged inappropriate touching occurred. Eventually, according to her account, he stopped trying to take the encounter further and engaged in autoerotic stimulation beside her. Afterward, she said she showered, she got dressed, and they left. And she described Nims behaving as though nothing unusual had happened. That's one account. Nims's account was fundamentally different. Through his lawyer and later publicly, he denied wrongdoing and characterized the accusations as false. So, two incompatible stories and nobody watching this video was in that room.
Which means nobody watching should pretend they were.
But later that same day, the woman communicated about the experience to a friend. The Times reviewed that message. The friend also confirmed that she later heard the account directly, and the woman supplied timestamp photographs which the newspaper said supported her timeline around the meeting. That's important because it means an account of something disturbing wasn't appearing for the first time when journalists contacted her much later. She was communicating about it around that same time.
Significant, but let's use the word corroboration carefully.
Exactly. The message supports that she was describing an experience at the time. The photographs support portions of the timeline. Neither one gives us an independent eyewitness inside the room.
That's crucial distinction because people hear her account was corroborated and imagine that means somebody watched the alleged encounter happen. That's not what we are saying.
And then evidence appears from Nim's side. His driver provided a written statement saying he took Nims to the Marriott that morning and that Nims returned to the vehicle within approximately 20 minutes. The woman remembered spending considerably longer with him. The Times said her time-stamped photograph supported her broader timeline, so even the length of the meeting was disputed.
And that's exactly why evidence for both sides belongs here.
Which is why I have a problem when people talk about this as though there was a conviction. There wasn't. Many sponsors had dropped Nims by this point.
Correct.
And when people say, well, he was never convicted, therefore it was proven false.
Also wrong. There was no trial, so neither guilt or innocence was adjudicated in court.
Which leaves us with a word people hate.
Unresolved.
Yes, unresolved. Except Kathmandu happened in 2023. And before that hotel room allegation ever occurred, another woman says something had already happened involving Nims. The public just didn't know it yet. So now we leave Kathmandu, we leave the hotels, the traffic, the restaurants, and we travel toward Pakistan into the Karakoram, toward a mountain whose reputation makes even accomplished mountaineers stop talking when they first see it. K2, 8,611 meters, the second highest mountain on Earth. And in 2022, another woman joined an expedition associated with Nims's guiding operation. The Times reported that she had paid approximately $55,000 for the expedition.
A little correction, it's not Pakistan, it's Gilgit-Baltistan.
Yes, Gilgit-Baltistan.
And this is where I said the story changes for me because she is now explicitly a client.
Think about what being a client means here. This isn't booking a guided walk in a city. This is a high altitude expedition, which can take weeks. The client relies upon operation logistics, food, equipment, ropes, camp organization, weather information, acclimatization decisions, potentially oxygen, and ultimately judgment. At extreme altitude, the advice of people leading your expedition can affect whether you reach the summit, whether you turn around, and in the worst circumstances, whether you actually come home or not. The original reporting itself noted how vulnerable that dependence can make clients in commercial high altitude climbing.
And that's why authority matters, not because clients aren't adults. Of course they are, but adults can still exist inside professional power relationships. My athletes are adults. That doesn't erase my responsibility as a coach.
Mountaineers often become very close, though. You're living together for weeks, often having to sleep in a tent, up on the mountain with your guide.
Of course, that isn't the problem. The problem is confusing closeness with permission.
According to the woman's account, one interaction happened after a ceremonial gathering at base camp. She said she was looking for something she needed in camp. She alleged that Nims took her toward a storage tent, and when she turned to leave, she alleged that he grabbed her arm, pulled her toward him, and kissed her without consent. She described becoming uncomfortable and frightened. Another climber later told the Times that during the expedition, she had described an unwanted interaction and said she did not want to be alone with Nims.
And if an athlete on one of my teams tells somebody, I don't want to be alone with my coach, I'm already concerned.
But that still doesn't establish what happened before she said that.
Of course, I'm talking about the professional environment, not a verdict.
And this is where the story turns again, because Nim's side didn't simply say, we deny it. Members of the expedition staff supplied written statements. 2 employees said the storage tent was guarded because valuable equipment was kept there, and said Nims did not go inside it during the expedition. The woman acknowledged people were often around the tent, but said nobody was there during the brief interaction she described. Another senior guide provided a statement saying Nims was not alone privately with her. The Times noted that this statement did not explain how the guide could know Nims's location during every relevant moment. So now, what do we do with that?
We include it.
Even though it challenges the allegation?
Especially because it challenges the allegation. Otherwise, we are not investigating. We are campaigning.
And I think that's where people lose trust, when evidence that complicates the preferred story disappears. But according to the woman, the storage tent interaction wasn't the end. She described another alleged encounter inside her own tent. She had injured her knee, according to her account. Nims entered while she was inside her sleeping bag. She alleged that what appeared to begin around checking the injury became inappropriate. She said she pulled away. She alleged an unwanted kiss and unwanted contact. She also alleged another occasion when Nims propositioned her while walking through the camp. Nims denied wrongdoing again. We have an allegation and a denial, but then another contemporaneous message. During the expedition, The woman texted a family member saying that Nims was repeatedly trying to have a physical relationship with her and that she was uncomfortable with it. The Times reviewed that message.
That matters.
Yes, but it still isn't an eyewitness.
I agree, and I want viewers to notice something. We are actually capable of saying that evidence matters without saying that evidence proves everything. There's a difference.
After the expedition, the woman continued communicating cordially with Nims for several months. According to her explanation, at least part of that communication related to reimbursement for equipment lost during the expedition. She said she did not see him again, and people defending Nims are entitled to notice that.
Absolutely. But cordial contact after isn't a scientific test for whether an earlier experience occurred. People behave differently after uncomfortable or traumatic events. Professional obligations continue. Money can be involved. Shared communities can be involved. There's no single behavior everyone follows. It's not standard.
Right. People can also get upset when a guide tells them they're not able to climb up and summit the mountain when they paid to do just that. But the opposite matters too. We shouldn't hide that communication because it might make the allegation look complicated.
I agree. Complicated is okay. Truth is often complicated.
And now comes the question that appears almost immediately whenever allegations like these are discussed. If this really happened, why didn't they go to the police? The factual answer is they didn't. The original investigation said neither woman had notified law enforcement or other authorities. They described uncertainty about what recourse was available, particularly given the international settings involved. But we shouldn't invent a reason beyond what they actually said. There was no criminal trial, no cross-examination, no judge examining all the evidence, no jury, no verdict.
Which means no conviction does not mean proved innocent, and published allegation does not mean proved guilty.
That sounds obvious.
Apparently, it isn't.
This is where you keep returning to something that happened before any alleged inappropriate conduct.
Because my professional experience makes me look upstream. After years coaching, you learn that safeguarding doesn't begin when somebody reports misconduct.
Absolutely.
It begins when you design the environment. Where do meetings happen? Who knows where people are? How are athletes contacted? Do conversations belong in a team group? What are travel protocols? What are curfew expectations? When are one-on-one conversations necessary? When can another staff member be present? What physical contact is actually necessary? The Coaching Association's rule of two is for interaction and communication to remain open, observable, and justifiable. Remember that, generally with more than one responsible adult present in potentially vulnerable situations. The Code of Ethics also explicitly recognizes the inherent authority held by coaches and the need to minimize vulnerable situations. But I want to be very precise. The rule of two does not literally say a coach can never touch an athlete. That's my own stricter practice around unnecessary physical contact.
Yeah, which is important because otherwise people might think we're claiming your personal rule is the only Canadian policy.
I'm saying years of experience have made me stricter. If I don't need to touch an athlete, why would I? If a professional conversation can happen in a common area, why would I move it to a bedroom? If information belongs to the team, why create unnecessary private messaging? If we are traveling, there are curfews, there are expectations, there are boundaries, and I'm not doing that because I assume my athletes are dangerous. I am doing it because I am the person with authority.
But here's my problem. I'm also a coach. I've played basketball. I've spent years around track. I hike. I understand teams. And sports isn't a laboratory. People become friends. Coaches and athletes laugh together. You spend enormous amounts of time together. On mountains, it's even more intense. It's not like there's kind of a professional office building available or a kind of an office room available. Somebody gives you a hand over a rock. Someone steadies you. Someone helps with an injury. You sit together for hours, you sleep in a tent with your guide, you share food, you suffer together. In my opinion, the only thing on your mind should be surviving and getting home safely. So I don't want us importing office etiquette into an outdoor environment and suddenly treating every informal interaction as suspicious.
But coaches are not your friends, and the person of authority is not your friend. Neither do I believe in this. Helping somebody across dangerous terrain isn't inappropriate touching. Treating an injury isn't inappropriate touching. A congratulatory interaction isn't automatically inappropriate. Context matters, but that's exactly why unnecessary ambiguity should be removed where you can remove it.
Absolutely. But none of that tells us whether inappropriate assault occurred.
No,
Then aren't you risking making professional imperfections sound like evidence of something criminal?
no. And that's where I think you're misunderstanding me. I'm criticizing risk. You are asking me to prove guilt. Those are different questions.
Exactly. And I don't want the audience confusing them either. And this is where your position surprised me the most, because culturally, some viewers might expect you to be more sympathetic to Nims. Refusing a hug can get confused with not treating people with respect. You come from a tradition geographically and culturally much closer to the Himalayas than most Western commentators discussing this. But your cultural background actually makes you stricter about leadership.
Yes, and I want to explain that without pretending every South Asian family or community thinks identically. I'm talking about the tradition I understand. We have a concept, guru. People sometimes translate guru as simply teacher, but it's deeper than that. Even an ordinary teacher traditionally receives a certain respect. You don't necessarily casually address the teacher by first name in that culture. There is etiquette. Sir, ma'am, respect for the position. A guru traditionally carries something even greater. You may touch the guru's feet. You may ask for blessings. You trust the person with your development. And here's the part people misunderstand. That reverence does not give the guru more freedom with the student. It gives the guru less. Because the greater the trust somebody gives you, the greater the burden you carry.
Right. So the coach essentially becomes a guru in the situation. They know more than you.
Yes.
So explain how that connects to this.
If I'm somebody's mentor, I don't behave toward the person the way I might behave with a friend at a party. The relationship is different. Their trust imposes discipline on me, and I look at expedition leadership through a similar principle. I'm not literally calling an expedition leader a guru or a coach. I am talking about responsibility. At 7,000 meters, a climber may ask, do I continue? Do I turn around? Is the weather safe? Can I make it? They are trusting the leadership structure. In that environment, the leader's clients should be under his care in the way you protect people entrusted to you. Not because they're children, they're adults, but because leadership creates responsibility. Again, greater authority should create greater restraint, not greater entitlement.
Right. But culture still matters a lot because international expeditions put people from completely different social worlds into the same tents. Nepal, Pakistan, India, Britain, America, Europe, the Middle East, East Asia. Everybody arrives carrying rules nobody can see. How much eye contact means something. How much joking is flirting. Is exchanging a phone number purely practical? Is hugging normal? Is informality friendly? Is it disrespectful? Can a man and woman meet alone without anybody thinking twice? One culture may see something as harmless, while another person experiences it completely differently. And it works in both directions. A Western person can behave in a way that is completely ordinary where she or he comes from, and somebody from a conservative Eastern environment could mistakenly interpret that behavior as romantic interest. Likewise, somebody from an Eastern culture can communicate in a way he considers completely ordinary, while a Western person reads the behavior differently.
I completely agree. And that's why working internationally requires more cultural literacy, not less.
So Nim's confidence could have been misread. All parties failed to establish boundaries. Trying to be as likable as possible to move your business forward could also be a factor in not establishing boundaries beforehand. Nobody wants to hurt anybody's feelings.
Possible.
His joking could have been misread.
Possible.
Earlier flirting could have produced assumptions.
Possible.
Then why are you so resistant when I say misunderstanding could explain some of this?
I'm not resistant. I'm drawing a line. Culture can explain ambiguous signals. Culture cannot override a clearly expressed boundary. If someone clearly says, no, stop, this is inappropriate, then the cultural argument becomes dramatically smaller.
If those words were said as alleged.
Exactly, which is why neither of us gets to announce what happened inside those private spaces.
And this is the possibility I keep coming back to. I don't think we necessarily have to choose between nothing happened and everything happened exactly as alleged. There may have been real interaction. There may have been flirting. There may have been moments both people initially understood similarly. There may have been moments they understood completely differently. Nims was famous, extremely confident, physically imposing, used to commanding expedition environments, used to people recognizing him, used to leadership. Could confidence become overconfidence? Could friendliness be read as attraction? Could somebody misread reciprocal banter as something stronger? Of course, human beings misread each other constantly.
Yes.
And once allegations become public, the temptation is to take everything that happened beforehand and reinterpret it as evidence. That's where I object. Flirting isn't proof of assault. Arrogance isn't proof. Confidence isn't proof. Fame isn't proof.
Agree, but being accomplished isn't a defense either. 14 mountains don't tell me what happened in a hotel room. Military service doesn't tell me. A documentary doesn't tell me. Being loved doesn't tell me. Being hated doesn't tell me. We have to stop turning biography into forensic evidence.
There's another possibility, and this doesn't accuse Nims of committing anything. Nims had extraordinary training. British Gurkhas, special forces, mountaineering, high altitude decision making, risk, expedition leadership, emergency situations. You look at that background and instinctively think this man was trained for everything, but nobody is trained for everything.
Exactly. Elite military training doesn't automatically mean someone has received the same professional boundary education a high-level coach receives. They are different disciplines. You can be brilliant at crisis leadership and never have formally studied athlete style safeguarding. You can understand life and death decisions and still never have been taught how to structure one-on-one professional relationship. So nobody has to wonder what they mean. That's why I'm interested in the industry, not just Nims. Commercial mountaineering professionalized incredibly quickly. Companies, premium clients, huge fees, global travel, social media personalities, celebrity expedition leaders, but did safeguarding professionalize at the same speed?
That's actually a much bigger question.
Of course it is. Who trains expedition leaders in professional boundaries? What is the policy on romantic relationships with current clients? What happens when the person somebody wants to complain about is also the most powerful person in the expedition company? Where is the independent reporting mechanism? Those questions matter, even if Nims never committed the acts alleged against him.
And now we arrive at the part supporting my skepticism. Because Nims himself believed something else was happening around him. He believed people were trying to damage him. And honestly, is that impossible? Nims was not universally loved. He rose incredibly quickly. He challenged older hierarchies. He was outspoken. He built businesses. He became wealthy and internationally famous. He made himself the center of his story in a climbing world, where Nepali high-altitude workers had historically received far less attention than Western expedition personalities. Success creates admiration. It can also create jealousy. In 2025, the podcast series Summit Justice gave Nims an extended opportunity to respond to the allegations and to his broader controversies. The series described him as categorically denying wrongdoing and alleging that a wider smear campaign had actually developed against him.
And I'm perfectly willing to investigate that possibility.
But do you think it helps him here now at this point?
No, it helps establish that negative reporting around him needs to be evaluated carefully. It doesn't automatically disapprove these two allegations. A man can have enemies and still do something wrong. A man can have enemies and be falsely accused. Both are logically possible.
Exactly, which is why I don't want people jumping from Nims had enemies to these women were part of a conspiracy. We don't have evidence establishing that either.
Don't connect dots, the evidence doesn't connect. But obviously, people are obligated to their own opinions.
Absolutely. And the truth is, these kinds of conducts happen in all types of sporting environments. And that's why there's a rising amount of awareness around these things. But here's why I don't dismiss Nims's complaints about the media entirely. There was a major dispute over other reporting about him in Nepal. This was separate from the New York Times inappropriate misconduct investigation. That's critical. Nims and companies associated with him complained about a series of reports published by the Himalayan Times. Nepal's press council formed a task force to investigate complaints that the coverage was one-sided. The council later blacklisted the newspaper and its online portal, saying it had repeatedly violated journalistic standards in reporting concerning Nims and his company. The publication disputed the process and the decision. And to me, that matters because it shows that not every negative story circulating around Nims should automatically be accepted without scrutiny.
Yes, but we have to erect a wall right here.
Go ahead.
The press council decision was about separate reporting. It did not adjudicate whether the two inappropriate allegations we are discussing here were true or false. Nobody should watch this and say, Nepal investigated the inappropriate allegation and cleared Nims. That would be inaccurate.
Agreed. But equally, nobody should pretend his complaints about hostile reporting existed only in his imagination. There was a separate media dispute in which Nepal's press council took significant action.
That's fair. Different case, different evidence. Keep the boxes separate, please.
And the reaction inside Nepal became even stranger. After the allegations were published in 2024, they entered Nepalese politics. One member of the House of Representatives called for Nims to be barred from entering Nepal. But then another lawmaker publicly pushed back. She argued that the attacks against someone who had brought international recognition to Nepal were unacceptable. Later that month, another lawmaker urged the government not to take action against Nims, arguing that attempts to punish him were motivated by prejudice or revenge. Think about what had happened. There still wasn't a criminal verdict, yet even Parliament was effectively splitting into opposing interpretations. Punish him, defend him, ban him, don't ban him.
Which proves something about politics, not necessarily about what happened privately.
Right. Public reaction was racing ahead while the central factual question remained unresolved. And this is something we investigated specifically because people will ask it. Were there other verified inappropriate misconduct cases against Nims in Nepal? Other police complaints, other prosecutions, other court findings? We found online rumors and claims only. We're not repeating them because after searching the reliable reporting available to us, we did not find another verified Nepalese inappropriate misconduct prosecution or court case against Nims that establishes additional offenses. The two extensively documented public allegations remain the K2 account and the Kathmandu account. And again, the original investigation said neither woman had taken these allegations to law enforcement or authorities.
That's exactly how it should be handled. If you can't verify it, don't use somebody's rumors to build corrector evidence.
Because once you start doing that, you're no longer asking what happened, you're trying to create a villain. And that's not what we're doing. Which leaves us with the question we've spent this entire story avoiding. Two women, two separate environments, allegations of unwanted, inappropriate behavior, contemporaneous communications supporting the fact that they were describing disturbing experiences around the time spent photographs supporting aspects of one timeline, statements from members of Nims Dai disputing portions of the account's earlier flirtatious communication, a claimed boundary-setting message that no longer exists, continued cordial communication after one expedition, no criminal trial, Nims' categorical denial, his later allegation that he was the subject of a broader smear campaign. So, I'm going to ask you directly, do you think Nims did it?
Maybe, maybe not. I do not know.
And everything you've said about boundaries?
Yep, after everything I said, I don't know. Because my professional opinion about boundaries cannot magically tell me what happened inappropriately inside a room I wasn't in. I can say if the circumstances were as described, I personally would have handled the professional relationship very differently. I can say I believe leaders should maintain clearer boundaries. I can say I think commercial mountaineering should have stronger safeguarding systems. None of these statements allow me to say, therefore, Nims committed the alleged inappropriate acts. That's a leap. I'm not making it.
And that matters to me because sometimes when people hear a professional criticize somebody's boundaries, they turn the criticism into evidence of guilt.
And sometimes people hear there wasn't a criminal conviction and turn that into proof nothing happened. Both are mistakes.
Then let me make the strongest version of my position. I think it's entirely possible that some kind of interaction happened. There had been communication, there had apparently been some flirtation. There may have been familiarity, and I think Nims's enormous confidence could have played a role in how interactions around him were understood. Maybe he thought something was mutual, maybe another person experienced the same interaction very differently, maybe cultural differences amplified those interpretations. Maybe his stature changed the way behavior felt to somebody in the moment. Maybe people around someone that famous, react differently because the power of the personality is so overwhelming. I don't know. But what I refuse to do is start with an allegation, walk backwards through every old interaction, and reinterpret the entire man until everything becomes evidence. That's unfair.
Fair. But let me challenge one part.
Go ahead.
If a person initially believes attraction is mutual, they can be wrong. That's human. But if the other person that clearly communicates refusal, the initial misunderstanding no longer controls what happens next.
Agreed.
So the crucial factual question isn't simply, was there flirting? It's what happened after the boundary was communicated.
And that's exactly the part that none of us can actually independently reconstruct.
Yes, and sometimes honesty means stopping there.
Now, make your strongest case without declaring Nims guilty.
Oh, no, my case isn't against Nims as a criminal defendant. My case is against professional ambiguity again. I am responsible for an athlete. I don't want my athlete wondering, is he talking to me as a coach or as a man trying to have a relationship with me? If I am traveling with a team, I don't want late night private room situations unless there is a genuine reason. Even then, I would not, you know it. I want meetings in common spaces. I want communication structured. I want boundaries around curfew. I want athletes to know who they can speak to. I don't want unnecessary physical contact. Again, that's my professional practice. And I believe an expedition leader has at least as much reason to think this way, maybe more. Because if you are leading somebody on K2, the power relationship isn't theoretical anymore. The client may depend on the organization you control for her summit attempt and potentially her safety.
Right. So there needs to be clear guidelines and policies put in place for mountaineering conduct between a guide and client. But if two consenting adults develop a relationship,
of course, they are adults. I'm not telling adults they can never have relationships. I'm saying timing and authority matters. If somebody is actively under my professional authority, I maintain the professional relationship. When that relationship genuinely ends, that's a different discussion. And that's why I return to the idea of the guru. People often think power means I have earned more freedom. I see it differently. A student calls you teacher, an athlete calls you coach, someone sees you as a mentor. A climber looks at you in the death zone and trusts your judgment.
yes.
Every layer of trust actually removes a little freedom from the leader because now you have to consider how your behavior affects someone who trusts you. Authority is not a privilege first. Authority is a burden first.
And that's probably where we overlap more than it sounds. Because as a coach, I understand that. Where we differ is how much professional boundary analysis tells us about the allegations themselves.
And my answer remains not enough to determine guilt, but enough to learn something.
And normally, this is where a story continues. Someone publishes another investigation, another witness comes forward, a lawyer responds, Nims gives another interview. Maybe documents appear. Maybe somebody eventually goes to police. Maybe a case reaches court. Maybe years later, we know more. Except this story ran out of time. July 30th, 2026, in Gilgit-Baltistan, on Broad Peak, 8,051 meters, the 12th highest mountain on Earth. Nims was leading an international expedition when an avalanche swept through the group. 10 climbers were caught for hours and then days. Information came slowly, search teams, army helicopters, ground rescuers, drone sightings, bad weather. Bodies were finally located high on the mountain, and eventually the answer nobody wanted. All 10 climbers were confirmed dead. Nirmal Purja was among them. He was 43 years old. And suddenly the man at the center of this unresolved story could never answer another question about it. When someone famous dies suddenly, the world begins editing. People remember achievements, photographs return, tributes appear. Old interviews become emotional in ways they weren't when the person was alive. And with Nims, there was so much to remember. Project Possible, 14 8,000ers in 189 days, K2 in winter, the Netflix documentary, the confidence, the message that nothing was impossible, the extraordinary visibility he brought to Nepali mountaineering. His death immediately produced international tributes, but underneath those tributes, the allegations returned too. And suddenly another argument began. Should this even be discussed after his death? His family is grieving. Friends are grieving. A mountaineering community has lost 10 people in one disaster. Why bring up something unresolved now? But the opposite argument exists too. Death doesn't delete public history. The allegations were made while Nims was alive. He denied them while he was alive. Both become part of the public record before Broad Peak. This is probably where I defend Nims most strongly, not because I know the allegations were false. I don't. I defend his right to uncertainty. He denied them, there was no trial, and now he cannot respond. I don't think death should quietly convert an allegation into a historical conviction.
And I agree with that, but death also shouldn't convert an allegation into silence.
Meaning?
Meaning, record exactly what happened. 2 serious allegations were publicly reported. He denied them. There was supporting information about portions of the accounts. There was counter evidence and disputed detail. There was no adjudicated criminal verdict. That's the history. Don't add a verdict history didn't produce. But don't erase a chapter because the ending is uncomfortable either.
Right. So what do we call him?
Nims Purja. What else? Extraordinary mountaineer, complicated public figure, a man against whom serious allegations were made. You can call him whatever you want. A man who denied them, and a man whose death means those particular accusations may never receive the kind of resolution people keep demanding.
And maybe this is why this story is so difficult. The internet wants Nims to become one of two things, either a hero or a villain. If he's the hero, the allegations must be lies. If he's the villain, the achievements become irrelevant. But humans don't work like that. Someone can achieve extraordinary things and also do terrible things. Someone can also achieve extraordinary things and be falsely accused of terrible things. The existence of one possibility doesn't prove the other.
Well, I've seen that many times, and that's why uncertainty is uncomfortable. People would rather join a team.
Maybe that's what we shouldn't do. Because perhaps there is one question we can answer without pretending to know what happened in those private encounters. Could commercial mountaineering learn from a professional sport?
Absolutely. And that doesn't require believing either side. Clear safeguarding standards, training for expedition leaders, transparent communications, clear boundaries between professional leadership and romantic relationships during active expeditions, meetings in observable spaces where practical, independent ways for clients to raise concerns, staff who understand cultural differences, and systems where somebody can say, I don't feel comfortable being alone with this person without fearing that the complaint destroys a dream they've spent years preparing for.
Because walking away at K2 base camp isn't like leaving an office.
Exactly. You have invested money, training, time, travel, emotion. You may be days away from ordinary civilization. That's why power matters. Again, power doesn't prove abuse. Power explains why safeguarding is necessary.
Did Nims Purja do it? I know some of you clicked this video wanting us to answer that question. We can't. And I don't think anybody who wasn't there should pretend they can. There are the things that support aspects of the women's accounts, and there are things that complicate them. There were communications made relatively close to the alleged incidents. There were photographs supporting part of one timeline. There were statements from Nim's side challenging the important details, and there were earlier flirtatious communication, and there was Nims's categorical denial. There was his later claim that he had been subjected to a wider campaign against him. There was no criminal trial deciding the allegations, and we did not find some hidden Nepalese inappropriate misconduct conviction that resolves everything. So the answer people want simply isn't there, unfortunately.
But maybe the lesson doesn't require a verdict, does it?
Maybe not. Because if Nims was misunderstood, strong professional boundaries could have protected him. And if somebody genuinely felt unsafe, strong professional boundaries could have protected her.
That's exactly the point. Safeguarding isn't only about catching bad people. It's about designing environments where good people don't create unnecessary ambiguity either.
And that's perhaps where our positions finally meet. I'm still unwilling to turn disputed private interactions into certainty.
And I'm still unwilling to treat professional authority casually.
I think fame can distort how interactions are remembered.
And I think authority can distort how safe someone feels.
I think culture can create misunderstanding.
And I think cultural difference is exactly why international leaders should be more careful.
And neither of us knows what happened behind those doors. Nims Purja spent his life climbing towards places where answers can seem brutally simple. The summit is there, or it isn't. You reached it, or you didn't. The altimeter gives you a number. The GPS gives you a position. The mountain doesn't care what you intended, but human beings aren't mountains. Memory isn't GPS. Intent doesn't leave footprints. And private moments don't always leave enough evidence behind for strangers years later to reconstruct them perfectly. Nims left behind one legacy written across the highest mountains on Earth. Project Possible, 14 Peaks, K2 in Winter, a Nepali climber becoming the center of his own story. And then another campaign. 2 serious allegations, 2 disputed accounts, contemporaneous messages, conflicting evidence around the edges, a categorical denial, no courtroom, no verdict. Then, Broad Peak, July 30th, 2026. An avalanche, 10 lives, and the possibility of another answer disappeared with him.
Maybe that's the burden history leaves with us. Not choosing the answer we like, living with the answer we actually have.
Which is?
Which is we don't know.
So we're not asking you, the listeners, was Nims guilty? A YouTube comment section can't conduct a trial that never happened. We're asking something harder. Should expedition leaders be held to safeguarding standards similar to professional coaches? Should active clients and expedition leaders have clearer professional boundaries? Should private meetings be avoided when reasonable alternatives exist? Should expedition companies have independent ways to report concerns? And when international teams bring completely different cultures together, who carries the greater responsibility for preventing the misunderstanding? The client or the leader?
And the final one question is, if someone dies with serious allegations against them unresolved, what is the fairest way to remember them? Do we erase the allegations because they weren't proven? Do we repeat them until allegations become facts? Or do we do something much harder? Preserve the achievements, preserve the allegations, preserve the denial, and refuse to invent the verdict.
Nirmal Purja climbed some of the highest places human beings can reach, but this part of his story remained down here with the rest of us. It's complicated, it's disputed, it's human, and it's unresolved. Whatever happened inside the Kathmandu suite, whatever happened beneath K2, the complete answer may never come down from the mountain. Keep the discussion respectful, question the evidence, question the standards, question us, but don't attack people. None of us were there to judge. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I'm Rima. This is Reembok Arcane. Don't forget to comment below. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.